Hi, this is Cody Libolt, and I'm interviewing Sean Edwards, and we're talking about politics and equality. And it's a good time to be talking about that because it's March 21st, and we're in the middle of the primary season. So
Yes, we
everybody
are.
has a horse in the race. So
Yep.
Sean is uniquely qualified to be talking about this because he's written a book called American Resurrection, and it's about the Constitution. And the question is, did the Constitution fail us because we seem to be losing the idea of a republic? Sean, you want to tell us just a bit about the theme of your book?
Yeah, it basically is saying that the Constitution failed because if you look at it from a purely logical or straight standpoint, what was the reason that the Constitution existed? The founding fathers wrote it with a purpose, and that purpose was to establish a government that was founded upon the idea that all people were created equal, or that all people are equal, whether you believe they were created or just happened. All people are equal, and I don't have the right to tell anyone else how to live their lives, and they don't have the right to tell me how to live my life. And that idea was very revolutionary in political philosophy and undid a lot of stuff in Europe. And our founding fathers were really the first ones that tried to take those principles and write them into a government, to build a government from the ground up that took those ideas and said, okay, how do you have a government that recognizes that all people are equal? Because the government is inherently coercive. It inherently forces you, the government has to force things upon people, like to pay taxes or to obey laws, whatever it is. By its very nature, it has to have some coercive power. So how do you have a government that recognizes equality? And so that was their goal. And that's what they wrote. And so they wrote the Constitution in a sense that says, okay, look, these are our principles. These are the principles that we believe the government, that man should be ruled by when it comes to government. And this is how we think that government should look. And these are the limits on that government, on what it can do and what it can't do. And this is what our government is trying to do. And at first it worked pretty well. I mean, they knew that it would need some revisions and then it would need to be fleshed out because they couldn't foresee every consequence or scenario. But, we've drifted very far from that. And if we just look from a point blank, did the Constitution protect the U.S. government, actually protect the citizens of the United States from an overly coercive government, one that went beyond protecting the rights of individuals? And no, it didn't. Today we have a government that is, it's just as coercive as any other modern government. It forces regulations and laws and stuff that have nothing to do with individual rights, but have things to do with fixing society or protecting values or whatever. And so if you look at what was the purpose of the Constitution? It was to protect the citizens of the United States, to protect them from a government that didn't recognize their equality. And it was to establish a government that was built on the idea that all people are equal, and it was going to live by that. And our government doesn't look anything like that anymore. And so that's why I say that the Constitution has failed.
What are some of the specific things that you would say you see today that are evidence that people's individual rights are not respected in this country?
I think the easiest examples of that are in social welfare programs. They're probably the easiest ones to look at because when you step back and you say what's actually going on here, it's that people are being forced to pay into a system, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, whatever it is. They're being forced to pay into a system that you can't opt out of. It's like if you don't pay this, you're going to jail for tax evasion. And it's basically a government mandated charity. And as much as I want to take care of the poor and I want to see the disenfranchised and the people who are struggling to succeed, I can't. You're forcing people to pay for another person's medical care. And that's just legalized theft. That's just forced charity. And so that's one example. Another, I think, a blaring example would be my current understanding of the National Defense Authorization Act, which gives the President and the Justice Department basically the authority to override several of our Bill of Rights in our Constitution based on the fact that the Justice Department thinks that you might be a terrorist. Well, then we can detain you and without telling you why, without guaranteeing you legal counsel. The president promises to use that power responsibly, but who gave the government never had the right to make that clause. That was like no access to a lawyer. I mean, how many Bill of Rights things are you being violated just from that very thing? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And most of the time, it's like that saying: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Is that people wanted to do good things. Now, there are just some crony things in there. People just did bad things, bad laws, bad things in the books. They're just trying to get an edge up on their competition or whatever it was. But I really believe that a lot of it was because people wanted to see society and the world change for the better. And they thought, hey, look, government can do it. And they didn't realize, because they didn't understand the philosophy of government, what they were doing. But that's where we are today.
I see. So then some of the ideas that you're talking about, the idea, that taxation is theft, that's something that you hear libertarians saying a lot.
Right.
How would you characterize yourself politically and in political philosophy?
Libertarian is probably the easiest thing that I can say that people will understand or have a general ballpark understanding of my position. But it's something that I don't personally say I'm a libertarian, like to myself when I'm having nice conversations with myself. I don't call myself a libertarian because libertarians can be all over the place on their policies. They can be just as not thought out as a Democrat or a Republican. It's just like, hey, we don't like government, and so yeah, I'm a libertarian because I just want less government. Well, and I think one thing that separates me from a lot of libertarians is I don't think taxation is inherently theft. I think as long as the taxes are being used to protect your rights as an individual, we can't consider that theft. I mean, you're being forced to do it if you live in the country, but it's like if the only thing you're paying for is military defense from invaders, a legal system to make sure that no one steals you, and a police force that keeps you safe from murderers and thugs, that's very different than having to pay for someone else's medical care or education.
It is. There's a fundamental difference, isn't there?
Fundamental difference. And or like corporate welfare, which are, tax breaks that certain industries get because they have politicians in their pockets. Stuff gets dirty. But if the government was really limited to just protecting the rights of the individual, then it's not, in my book, that's not theft. You're, like I think Ayn Rand puts it, it's as if you're paying for a service.
Yeah.
It's like I'm paying the military to protect me from an invading force. I'm paying the police force to protect me from someone that might want to rob me. I'm paying the justice system to make sure that the unbiased rule of law secures justice for me. I mean, that's very different.
The way you're explaining it, that would probably disqualify you, at least from being a strict libertarian, because as I understand it, at least a lot of them are anti-government.
Yeah,
they would just say not just I want a smaller government. That's just step one. They want no government,
right?
At least some of them. So, but what you're describing is the idea that there is one kind of government and that it should be this and not that.
Right.
And actually, I didn't used to think that, but having just had some conversations with you in the past and thinking through it over and over and over, I agree with you.
Cool.
And I agree with you that there should be, it is okay that there are taxes in order to provide for the defense of rights. And, if we could find a way that didn't require income tax or that didn't require a tariff or something like that, that would be wonderful too. And that's a possibility.
Yeah.
But, I'm in agreement with you and with Ayn Rand and with probably Thomas Jefferson and the founding fathers, because obviously the income tax is something that happened only in World War I. It wasn't even part of our government for a long time.
It wasn't. I mean, I think, and I know I was surprised to learn that both property tax and income tax happened at in the early part of the 20th century. So in the early, like the 19-teens. And I was like, wait, what? I was just so used to property taxes and income taxes that you just figure they've always been there, but they weren't. They weren't for a long time. You raise an interesting point how most libertarians are just anti-government. And I think that is probably a really big distinction because, and if you look at the philosophy of politics, you can see these almost kind of like two offshoots of in this individual rights equality branch tree, if you want to think of it. One is government when it's limited to protecting the rights of the individual is a good thing, and the other one is just government is inherently bad. It's inherently evil, and it's a necessary evil that we have to limit. And my take on that is, as long as we need to protect each other from I need to protect myself from other individuals who want to violate my rights. Like, my rights as an individual don't exist in the real world without a government. Without something bigger than me protecting the land, the borders from foreign invasion, and protecting my personal property from theft and my person, like assault or murder. Those rights don't exist. I could say all day, I'm an individual and I have equal rights just as you, but that's not going to stop the ISIS from killing me.
Yeah. The way I think about it is that every decision that we make as individuals, moral decisions, and then as a group, society, political decisions, it all needs to be based on what is actually the need of a human life. And so if your ideal requires something that would end up killing you, then it's not a very good ideal.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's definitely not. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of people that are listening to a recording like this, and they're thinking, okay, so these are some really unusual political views.
Fairly radical.
If I had been, like 10 years ago, if I would have heard this, I would have thought, well, what about the government is supposed to do things, and the government has a right to, because the government or the leaders of the land, they own the land, and it's almost like, even though I grew up in the United States, I grew up with the psychology of a monarchist.
Yeah.
There should just be a king, and part of that is because I'm a Christian, and because I know that there is a king of the universe. Right. And so I know that a lot of people. And
some Christians just want a king.
Oh, they do. They do want a king. And God's people have been asking for a king since the time of Saul, right?
Yeah, right.
And God has been cautioning them about just exactly what a king is.
Right.
So, well, a lot of the people that follow me are Christians, and I think the same is true for you.
Yep.
And I just guessing, more of the people that follow me are going to be coming from the conservative perspective, kind of cultural conservatives. And I know that your blog really talks a lot to libertarians. And so I think that it's kind of neat to have this conversation together, because you and I are probably the most similar out of all of our followers. But I want to ask you some questions from the point of view of Christians. How do Christians think about voting in this particular election that's coming up? And now the listener has a pretty good idea of where you and I are coming from, why we're going to say stuff. But let's go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be a great discussion, because I think this will be a point where you and I do have a few different things to say and different opinions, and that's great. I know that just from privately talking with you, that a lot of my personal positions have been clarified and changed and amended and challenged. So it's always good to talk with someone who doesn't fully agree with you, because it stretches you to think different. So the question is, what should a Christian be thinking about when they come to vote this November? Well, I don't know. I'm cautious of saying how should a Christian think, and let me just tell you how I'm thinking.
Okay.
For better or for worse, this is where I'm thinking right now. What is the least damaging choice? What choice is your video froze? I can hear you, but your video. Oh, there you are. Nope, you're back again. Okay. What choice is going to cause the least damage? Which candidate is going to take us in the direction that is going to move us? All of them are going to move us further away from, I think, some of the ideas that you and I really believe. Because I don't think culturally we're there yet. We were 200 years ago. Like, the common person knew these philosophical ideas of equality and what that meant for. You could go into a tavern and bring up the name John Locke, and people there would know who you were talking about and his principles, which I think is crazy. Because if you go into a bar now and you say, yeah, so what do you think of John Locke's Second Treatise on Government? And they'd be like, what?
But you go into a tavern now and you say, who's the vice president?
Yeah. I think all the choices are going to take us, the current choices. The exception of that is I don't know what Ted Cruz would, his exact, I feel like if I feel like he wouldn't take us too far off track. So honestly, if I could just pick someone to be president, that out of the current candidate list, it would be Ted Cruz.
Yeah, I would also definitely go with Ted Cruz. Now, before Rand Paul exited his campaign, would you have gone for Rand Paul instead?
I was torn there. I personally feel principally I like where he stood. I just didn't ever feel like he exuded at this point in his life great executive traits.
Okay.
But then again, our current looks like the guy who's going to be our current nomination doesn't have great executive traits either. So it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I mean, I think he was probably more in line with some of my positions than all of them. I believe in a balanced budget. Let me just put this out there, okay?
And he believes in it too.
Yes, he does. I have worked with local governments before in the past, and I know in state governments, I know the unintended consequences that laws can have that you didn't even foresee. And it's like, oh, well, we didn't realize that was going to handicap our economy because we didn't understand that this was going to happen, which is just the history of pretty much every law and regulation ever written. But, he was pushing real hard for a constitutional amendment to make sure that the budget was balanced. Pushing real hard. It was on his agenda list. He wants to pass a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. And even though principally I'm like, heck yes, because we need to be fiscally responsible, I was a little leery. I was like, even if he could do it, because I don't think he could have been able to do it, I was a little leery because I'm like, whoa, how would that law be written? And what consequences might that have?
Sure, because then people try to go around the law, and then what is that going to look like?
Right, and then what happens if the government gets itself the nation gets itself into a crisis and needs to spend money right now, but it can't because the Constitution says no, you can't do that. But it's like, holy crap, we need to spend money right now because we have an invading army or whatever it is. I'm sure that there would be clauses to cover for those specific things, but it's that kind of situation that makes me hesitant to go that extreme. Yeah. So but other than that, yeah, I would have voted Rand Paul.
Unfortunately, we're not even talking about Rand Paul very much anymore.
No, we're not.
Not until next election. But so you brought up these questions of you feel like the United States is backsliding away from freedom. What do you think are specifically some of the changes that you're afraid of seeing in the next 4 years? Say, for example, Hillary Clinton were to become the president.
Obviously her approach, she wants to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, which, I'm not against people having insurance. I'm just against the government forcing you to buy insurance. And
effectively forcing you to buy it for somebody else.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's just wrong. That's just wrong. Even though the intentions were good, it's morally wrong. So her advancements there, I don't know how to quantify it other than just more of the same. It would just be more of the same.
Thought about what it's going to feel like when we have these massive student loans and then we end up paying taxes so that the kids younger than us don't have to.
Yeah, right. It's those kind of programs that they want to advance. And, this is more of this is maybe more where we come into alignment with a lot of conservatives, is that they think Hillary thinks the solution to a lot of these problems is more government. I've seen one of the things that you've posted on Facebook is that Hillary is quoted as saying she believes that the primary role of the state is to take care and educate children. What?
Right.
That's terrifying.
It is.
Believe me, I'm all for great education, but that's scary.
Yeah.
So it's just seeing stuff like that. And then the continual corporate welfare, like the loopholes that the big industries get, the fact that we don't have a free economy and that they all seem to be okay with that. The fact that they want to put tighter reforms on Wall Street, the fact that they want to raise taxes on, the capital gains tax and inheritance tax. All that stuff is just it'll just keep going.
Yeah, the banking industry is already the most regulated out of all of them. And the reason why they have such a hard time is because these regulations are so hard to follow and so hard to prosper under.
Exactly.
They actually devote a very large portion of their working day to trying to figure out how to still make money, even though they've had their arms cut off.
I know, yeah, and it drives me nuts. And, I've been working with the bank recently. I'm looking at making a home purchase, and because of these, it's ludicrous the amount of regulations and the rules and stuff, paperwork that you have to fill out to even start going down and start getting that stuff ready. And it's because of the laws, these laws, those laws. And even if I've been in some situations where the banks are like, look, looking at all of your stuff, your income, your money and everything, you are a great candidate for this loan. But because of these laws and these regulations and stuff like that, we also need A, B, and C. And so we just can't help you.
I see.
And it's like, oh, okay. So these banks would help me. They would invest with me. We would partner together. But because of these regulations, laws, they can't.
Mm-hmm.
It's not comfortable for them because of all the liabilities they have now that they're being held accountable for and all that random stuff.
So under Hillary Clinton administration, we see dozens of bad trends just
continuing.
Now under Donald Trump, do you have any idea what you're going to see?
No, and that's the thing is well, what do you do? I feel like we don't have any idea what that would look like. He has a track record of saying some really crazy things. Now, does he? I heard someone say recently, and I thought this was a great saying: if Donald Trump believes the things that he says, he is not fit to be president. And then responded with is if he doesn't believe the things that he says, then he also isn't fit to be president. So, but what trends would we see continue? I don't know, really.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I've heard him described as being trans-convictional.
Yeah.
And that is, within a single day, he can have 3 different opinions. And he doesn't know that they're contradictory. And if he finds out, he doesn't care.
No, he doesn't. And that can be dangerous. Very dangerous. But so, going back to your original question of how should Christians vote and me saying, well, let me tell you how I'm thinking. Some people say the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And so in that principle, you'd say, well, you should go with Hillary. Well, the problem is that I've seen that before. I've seen that. We've seen those kind of politicians in office. We know what we're going to get. Like pretty much. And those type of politicians, they're good at working with Congress. And even though they have party lines and, Democrats can't get most Republicans, they can still get stuff done that I wouldn't want to see happen done. It seems as though, and I would hope that some of these ideas that Donald Trump wants to go after are so crazy that he wouldn't be able to get the same sort of congressional support that a more traditional candidate would be, and that he could be more easily tamed by the balance of powers. The flip side could be said, and that because he's so savvy with business and money and stuff like that, that he could work Congress better than other presidents. I just don't know. It's a crapshoot. So, part of me is like, I'd almost prefer to see Donald in the office because I feel like a lot of his crazier ideas would be stopped by the Supreme Court or Congress. But ultimately, I don't know. It's a gamble. So I don't have a choice made yet. When it comes time to vote, I honestly don't know what I'm going to do.
I see.
What about you? What do you think? How about you answer that question? How do you think, Christian?
Yeah,
what do you think?
I'll answer it. Donald Trump, he scares me for so many reasons. And I'm not convinced that he's any better than Hillary Clinton, but I am convinced that he is more volatile and unpredictable, dangerous,
right?
And that his own personal lifestyle and his use of language and his treatment of people is worse than Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
And so when I consider those factors, that that makes me really think long and hard about it. My conclusion is I would vote third party or write in a candidate. Yeah. If I was putting, Matt Walsh said this. He said, somebody asked him, let's say there's a gun put to your head and you have to choose Hillary or Donald. What's your choice? And he says, the bullet. And
the bullet.
and I feel the same way. And I agree. I love that, because at some point you do need to make a decision that you're just not going to accept a candidate, even if
Right.
the other one is just as bad. And now, when you're talking about what you expect to see in the next 4 years, that's part of the picture. But the other part of the picture is, what do you expect to see in 20 years or 100 years? And we know that the people in a nation begin to take on the characteristics of those that they see in power and leadership, because that sets the standard for what's acceptable. We've already seen that in the riots and stuff like that. And I think that it would be a humiliating thing to our country.
Yeah, I think so too.
Not in the slightest way funny to see a man like Donald Trump as our president. I mean, we might as well just pick a random, a pimp or something, and just put him there. It would be just as shameful. And so my thoughts on what could happen. Let's say that Trump was the president. I can see that he would be happy to make deals with the Republicans one day and the Democrats the next, and play both against each other. I'm not convinced that he's a very good businessman. I am convinced that he's more concerned about his own reputation than he is about the United States. Now, with Hillary, there is the argument that she could be stopped by Republicans if it was a Republican Congress.
Yes.
And one of the things that's important is, how is the presidential candidate going to affect voter turnout, and how is that going to affect other races, such as for governors and for senators and representatives? So it's said that a lot of Christians would just not vote if Donald Trump was the Republican nominee, which would affect the Republican Party negatively. Yeah, but they would perhaps lose a lot more than just the presidency.
Yeah, but I've seen a lot of articles, mostly on my Facebook feed from my liberal friends, expressing concern because in every primary or caucus, Donald Trump, we think it's because of Donald Trump, has repeatedly pulled out more voters, Republicans, more voters. Like if you look at the statistics from like the last primary and the last election, Republicans are voting way more in the primaries and the caucuses than the Democrats. And so I saw one article, I think it was even on Forbes, that talked about that said, Bernie says that he's leading a revolution, but really Donald Trump is, because more Republicans everywhere are voting because of him. So based on that information, if that's true, you could almost say the otherwise, that it would, if that's true and Donald Trump is our president, that could really suck. But it might also mean that in Congress and in like local governorships and stuff like that, states and local governments, that conservatives, Republicans could see a surge. So I don't know if the trade-off there, is it worth having a loose cannon in the presidency to gain a bunch of seats in Congress and state elections? I don't know. I mean, it's just a bad situation if you ask me.
Yeah, and there's also the question of whether Donald would be able to defeat Hillary. And I've heard that it's almost as if there's only one person in the world who could not beat Hillary, and that's Donald Trump.
I don't know. Because it seems like, going back off that information, we can speculate all we want, and at the end of the day, we won't know until it happens. But Hillary doesn't inspire people. So if an election came through and it looks like it's going to be Hillary versus Donald, unless Cruz can pull ahead, which he might be able to do. But if it's Hillary and Donald, Donald's pulling people to the voting booths because people seem to like what he's saying. Unfortunately, that says very bad things about our country. And if that's the case, if Hillary's not, the only way that you could get more Democrats to vote is for people saying, if you don't vote, Donald's going to be president. But that's not a compelling enough argument. That's not a fiery position as all of the crazy people who are going crazy about Trump. So who's going to be able to pull more voters to the booth come November? It very well could be Donald, even if he loses in all the debates. And even if Hillary produces a better campaign, they may just pull more Republicans.
Yeah, those numbers are, you can hear people talking about it in a lot of different ways.
Right.
one of the things I've wondered about is whether there are just more Democrats or independents that are voting in the Republican primary, and that maybe that's why we see less participation in the Democratic primaries.
Well, and then there are the states that they allow their, I can't keep them straight, the primaries and the caucuses, that you can vote in both. Even if you're a registered Democrat, you can vote Republican, and if you're a Republican, you can also vote for the Democratic primaries.
So are you saying that they could vote in both the same year?
Yes. So like for the primary, I could pick, my pick for Republican, and then the strategy is to pick someone that you think is going to lose on the other side.
That's just asking for it. That's just asking for
not all states
confusion.
do that. Not all of them, but some of them do.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, yeah. Ultimately this problem that we see, the position that you and I both have about politics and individuality and individual rights, this is not something that, without a miracle, without some divine intervention, this is not something that we're going to see shift in the next 4 years.
Sure.
This is a cultural thing. These ideas need to permeate the culture. And how long does that take? I don't know. Maybe it only could take 4 years. But even if it took 4 years, it would have to percolate up into the elections. The elections, who we elect into office are going to lag a little bit behind the cultural transition. The thing that I've liked about Ron and Rand Paul, what they've been doing the last few elections, is they've been getting the libertarian individual rights message more mainstream. But that raises an interesting issue, though, that I heard someone bring up recently, is that it's possible we're looking at the fracturing of the two-party system.
Yes.
Because both parties are having a real problem with their extremes. You got the conservatives that have a more traditional route, and then you have the crazies that are going for Trump and whoever else. And then on the Democratic side, you've got the more traditional route going with Hillary, and then you've got the crazy socialists following Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
Is this something that will pass? So in the next presidential election, we won't see this polarization? I don't know. It's continually become more polarized as at least from my perspective, the young age that I'm at, it's become more polarized. It's possible the next presidential elections that it's even worse, and that two parties wouldn't be able to hold all the candidates.
Yeah, and that's especially I'm thinking about, is the GOP going to be dissolved into competing groups?
Yeah,
because there's just a lot of animosity between those people that are really in favor of the Constitution, Tea Party type, versus everybody else, and they're going to leave. I mean, they're going to leave if Donald Trump is the nominee, and Donald Trump is going to leave if he's not the nominee. So someone's going to leave. And
then again, because I have a lot of liberal friends on Facebook, and I see their posts, I know that there's animosity between the Democrats too, between the establishment which is backing Hillary, and then the more extremes which are backing Bernie because they think the establishment isn't doing enough. They think the government, we should be social. We should be socialist. We should have a socialist government of some sort. And so could we see the Democratic Party fracture? Or all these people that want to see socialists, there becomes a socialist party that's not that's not part of the Democratic Party. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So it's I don't know. But I'm an innately optimistic guy. So even if I think we hit some turbulent water here, I think history has proven that the world has, over the last 250 years, 300 years, has continually gotten better. It's had some down blips, but life expectancy, political freedom, all those sort of things have continued to go up. So I don't think that we're heading towards an Armageddon. That doesn't mean I'm looking forward to what's ahead.
I see. One of the bigger concerns, since there is this fairly new in the history of mankind, this understanding of individual rights, and major achievements by Locke and by the founding fathers, and then even in the 20th century, major achievements by some thinkers, including Ayn Rand, about what is the right kind of government. And the concern that I have is what happens if these advances in ideology are stifled by an authoritarian, by censorship. Yeah. And so there is a race against time in the United States, and perhaps in the whole world. Is this ideology going to take hold in people's hearts in this generation or the next one or two generations? Because looking further than that, we can foresee perhaps 80 years from now, given the current trends, we can see thought control. We can see 1984 type, be 2084, but we can see it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that if you look at it from a purely possible outcome, yes, I think that there's some serious possibility that we could see censorship of that sort occur, and that's scary, and we need to be on guard. A lot of times when I write, I'm not very faith forward, meaning I don't really use my faith as a lot of defense of things because I want to talk principally with people. But honestly, my optimistic view of the world, it comes from statistics. It comes from the fact that if you look at the statistics over the last 200 years, you can't but see an obvious uptrend and a trend for the better. And even in the category of political freedom, it's not as fast as everything else, but based on censorship and the things that you've described, censorship, oppressive regimes, and stuff like that. There's an organization, several, but one I can't remember the name of, that they track these things, and they track the state of the world and all the nations and what kind of government people live under, and that has continually gotten better. And I believe that the idea of individual rights is a progression of thought that occurred in mankind, but ultimately is an idea established by God. And just by the nature of who he is and the nature of creation. And it's a fundamental belief of mine that now that thing's been revealed and made manifest on the earth, it might go into hiding for a while, but it can never go away. It's going to progress. And and I think that there's even, I think if some crazy person got into office and started doing censorship next week, I think it'd be way too late. Still think it would be way too late, because there are millions of people that have read Ayn Rand, that have read John Locke, that have read all the great thinkers that have helped influence our government. I don't think that could happen. Now, that might be naivety. That doesn't mean you shouldn't plan that could happen. I can't remember who. It's The Art of War. It says, don't plan for what you think will happen. Don't plan for what you think your enemy will do. Plan for what your enemy could do.
Okay.
So, I don't think that we're going to see the complete erasure of these ideas. But we should plan like they're under fire and that they could be wiped out.
There's also there's this trend that I have noticed where, depending on what you think about, if you're a Christian, what you think about the end times, you're going to have more optimism or more pessimism.
Yeah, and that's almost a whole different discussion.
maybe we should do that another time and talk about just like because I don't necessarily see the connection. I think that you could hold one or another eschatology, and at the same time you could have one or another opinion about whether or not the United States is getting better in the next 50 years. I don't see that they have to be correlated, but I do notice that there's this pessimism among Christians. And
it's not just Christians though, it's culturally. You can go and talk to people who aren't Christians, and if you ask them, hey, over the last 50 years, do you think that the world, not just the United States, but the world has gotten better or worse? And most of them will say worse, even if they're Christian or not. Which actually, if you go and you look at statistics, it's not true.
Especially when you look at the entire world. Looking at just the United States, you would see some negative changes, and you would see, we're a wealthier nation than we were 50 years ago. Right. But moral decline, I would think. I don't know the per capita amount of sin, but
yeah, and that's hard to quantify. But like when it comes to things like life expectancy, access to healthcare, hunger, food, things like that. Sure. It's statistically undeniable. You can't say that the world from those metrics has gotten worse, and from those metrics, it's all gotten better. And so I know that there's a guy, Hans, I forgot his name. He's made several YouTube videos he's from Germany, showing how the world's getting better. And there was this great interview with him. He's interviewed by someone from CNN. I wish I could remember his last name. But they were debating, and the guy was like, but don't you think that this could be happening or that? And the guy and Hans, whatever his name is, Rollings. Anyway, he says, "No, there's no debating this. You're wrong. I'm right. The statistics show that the world is getting better. You can't debate this. You're just wrong." and the guy, who's a famous interviewer, he's like, "Well, all right. I guess we're done with the interview." Like, but there's this pessimism, and I think actually some of that even drives the support behind Donald Trump. There's this fear and this pessimism. There's this fear that the world and the United States are in decline, and we need a king. We need a strong king to protect us from the scary world. Mm-hmm. And if you look back, it's like, actually, the question I want to ask is, if you think if the world's getting worse, what other era of history would you rather have lived?
Right. I guess 1980s.
Yeah, but even like cancer treatments and stuff like that weren't as good. So people were smoking all the time. You know what I mean? Like, if you just look at the basic metrics of life and what life would have looked like, I can't think of a time I would rather have lived that's in human history. You're like, well, what about with God and everything? It's like, well, okay, but let's talk about human history, like that we have in the history books.
When people talk about putting an authoritarian type of a leader in charge, I just want to know, do they know anything about history? Has that ever been a way to improve anything? And I'm not saying we can compare one current Donald Trump to any particular past leader, right? But just think about, like, is the world going to get better under that kind of personality? Has it ever?
If you're a scared person that thinks that the only way that your country and your area of life is going to be protected is if you have a king, then yeah, you're like, I need a strong guy, and I think that this guy won't enslave me, so I'm going to give him the power to do so because I think that he's not going to do it because he can use that power to protect me. Yeah, this debate even went back to the founding fathers. Talking about that Benjamin Franklin's often misquoted, but he actually did say something to the effect of, it wasn't as eloquent as the quote that's out there, but those people who seek security over freedom deserve neither and won't have either of them. The one that's out there is very fluent, eloquent. He didn't actually say, but he did say something very similar, but it was more choppy. But, so they had even people arguing back then, well, for the purposes of security, we need a stronger government. And people are like, no, we need to live by our principles and believe that freedom is freedom and equality is equality, and that no one has the right to overturn that. So this has been a debate even long before us, but it just seems like more and more people are now in favor of an authoritarian leader because they think it's going to help them. It's scary.
Do you think that there is a problem with trying to set up a dichotomy between liberty and security?
I do think so.
I think that liberty, freedom, it can mean a lot of things. And, people think freedom means the ability to, like, run down the beach without chains on your legs. And if that's the best way that they have of understanding the idea of liberty, political liberty, then they're just mixing it up with, like, for example, freedom from hunger. A hungry man is not free. And at that point, you can use the word to mean anything you want. But liberty, as the founding fathers understood it, is not in competition against security. And in fact, the nation can never be more secure than when individuals have liberty.
I can't agree more. I mean,
so then it just comes to the question of defining specifically what is the role of the government and what isn't the role of the government. And as you've said, there's the major concern that we see in our country today is it's an entitlement state. I think that about 70% of the national budget right now goes to what's called payments to individuals. Yep. Which means redistribution of wealth by taxation. Yep. There's Social Security and pensions, and and healthcare as well. But it's just everyone that loves freedom is going to look at that and say, oh, that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Right. Absolutely.
So what do you say to somebody who looks at the government and says it needs to be bigger?
Well, before I quickly touch that, I have to say here in a few minutes I'm going to have to get off, and we're going to have to end this fun little blab, and hopefully these become a regular thing, and we can start to interact with some of our followers. That would be a lot of fun. what do I say? Well, this is a conversation you and I were having like a week ago or so, and I am trying to pick that lock. I'm trying so many different strategies to get someone to see the folly of their thinking. And I think you actually raised the best strategy, which is you got to ask questions. You got to ask the right questions to get people to think. And I remember I tried that. I think I asked too many questions, but I had a friend. This was so funny. He's a great guy. I like him, and he follows me, and he thinks that he likes a lot of my ideas. But he messaged me one day and said, "So I've been following you, and I can see that you're upset with some of these problems in the government, just like I am. So why don't you support Bernie?" Mm-hmm. And to me, I just wanted to say, now this is the problem. The fact that you don't understand philosophically why I can't support Bernie. And so I did. I asked him several questions about, it's like, so what are rights and where do they come from? Mm-hmm. And are there rights? Does society as a whole have rights? And if so, where do they come from? And what obligation do we have to protect them? Because I wanted him to honestly, I just wanted him to answer the questions. Because I wanted to know, like, how do you, someone who is a supporter of Bernie and is all over the place when it comes to your philosophy, a walking contradiction, as so many people are, how can you not see the mutually exclusive ideas that are being held there? And how have you pieced this philosophy together? What's your thinking? And so I sent him like 7 questions, and he said, I am going to answer these, but I'm not going to answer these right away. I haven't heard from him, and that's fine. I know it was kind of overwhelming, but I know personally, because I've had my worldview flipped upside down a couple of times, that is never a pleasant process, and that when someone starts asking you questions that makes you unsure about your worldview, I'm going to try to put this the nicest way possible. It takes a lot of courage to sit through that. Mm-hmm. And actually analyze what you think and believe. And I think some people would just prefer to avoid having to do that.
Yeah, and most people are not on the premise of, I would like to fix my worldview, because they're going to assume that they have the worldview in place. I assume that. Mm-hmm. And then when you hear somebody else's perspective, you're not asking, am I wrong? You're asking, are they right or wrong?
Right.
Based on the standards that I've already accepted.
Right.
And then their reaction is usually going to be, they're having to decide, do I want to even engage with this person or not? And very often it's just, you're wrong. And sometimes it's you're wrong because of such and such. But it's never, I want to know why you think that. I hardly ever have anybody ask me, why do you think that?
Yeah.
And I think that is probably, that's what we need to do as communicators, is people will listen when they know that they've been listened to.
Absolutely.
And I mean, how many people have you honestly listened to and asked that level of question? It's beneficial to them when they get to answer it, but it's also just building that trust.
Yeah. And it's learning. Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like I've gotten to this place now where it's not pleasant to have my worldview challenged, but I know the benefits of listening to someone who very much disagrees with me. I've had some very liberal friends of mine. I actually can say that some of my very liberal friends were part of the reason I became an Ayn Randian libertarian, or however you want to classify me, because they asked me questions that challenged my conservative worldview. Like, well, how is that helpful? How is that fair? And I'm like, oh, you're right. Mm-hmm. That isn't fair. What I have found with a lot of people, conservative, liberal, whatever, is that they haven't thought through their philosophy. They don't want to think through their philosophy. And the struggle I have is being a blogger. And in that context, it's hard to carry on a conversation with someone where they can really feel like they've been heard. Mm-hmm. Like in comments on a Facebook page or comments on a blog post or something, it's really hard to have a heartfelt conversation where I can actually listen to the person's heart, what they want and how they're thinking, and not just as a manipulative tool for communication, but genuinely say and communicate, okay, I understand what you're saying and I understand your heart and I really respect it and I value it. What about A, B, and C? How does that play into your equation? It's really hard to do that. I found it difficult to do that over the internet. Because
Yeah.
even if you say, hey, I hear you, man, I love your heart for wanting to help the poor or do all this sort of stuff, but what about A, B, and C? It's still combative. It's just like the nature of it being depersonalized because it's in text format. It's hard to do.
Yeah, and because it's so public, I mean, you're put on the spot, and most of the time you're thinking, how can I say something that will not make me look bad?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I'm also trying to as well, how can I say something that's not going to make this person look bad? Because I've been on the receiving end of that. When you just get a vitriol response from someone, like you post and then they're just mad at you and they're like, bleh! Well, that doesn't make me go, oh, you know what? You raised some really great points. Let me listen to you. I have no desire to talk to you if you're firing cruise missiles at me. We're not going to have a nice political debate if I feel like you're trying to cut my throat.
Sure.
So every time I'm trying to write a response to someone, I'm like, okay, how can I not put them on the defensive and have a conversation with it? It's just hard. So I'm still trying to pick that lock.
Right. Yeah. Not putting them on defensive. Also, keeping them interested, because
Yes.
I mean, you're making a big request when you ask somebody to sit down and write out 3 or 4 sentences to tell you what they think. I mean, that takes some time, and
it does.
And then you're putting yourself out there. You're vulnerable, because then, what if you took the time to write out a really thorough response and then somebody just doesn't even, they respond like, okay, or they don't respond, or they make fun of you. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could go wrong.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. But, I think for anyone who's watching this recording, kudos to you. I think something like, if it's not blab, something like this could be a great way to engage with people, because then we can actually talk to them. We can see their faces. We can say, okay, tell me more about that. Tell me why you believe that that's something the government should do. Or we can ask them those questions and actually have a conversation. I think that could be a lot of fun for anyone who's brave enough to request one of the open seats.
Absolutely.
Well,
okay.
I was going to say, I have to get going, so we're going to have to wrap up.
Okay. Well, Sean, it's been excellent experience talking with you. I feel like we laid out a whole bunch of good foundations for the kind of conversations we should have.
Yeah, and I really like the format of asking questions, although if we get more people involved, we'll have to get them on board. But next time I'll come with some specific questions for you and what you're doing and what you feel like you're messaging and who you're talking to, because it is different than mine. And we're just kind of have 2 different targets that we're going after, but we both want to see generally the same thing happen in our country. So that's what's fun. Totally. All right. Well, cool, man. Thank you. That was fun.
It's great talking to you today.
You too.